Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I am just about to start a quick poll before we dive in, which you might be able to see now, hopefully in the corner of your screen. Let me just close that. So, like I said, I posted a poll. Have a little look at that poll if you've just joined. It's a really simple question around whether you've used AI in your music creation process. I'm very, very interested to know whether anyone joining the call has already used AI. And then before we jump into the conversation, I also wanted to mention that at the end of this call, we will post in the chat a 50% discount code for artists who want to join Unheard. This will be a 50% off your annual subscription. So for those that have joined at the end, you'll get the opportunity to redeem that code. And Alex is also Alex's team is also going to be posting a link with regards to some interesting things they're working on at Boomy and they want your help with. Alex, do you want to mention just quickly what those are?
Yeah, for sure. We are working on a really fascinating set of what we would call next generation, AI models, particularly with ethical training standards in mind. And as we build those products, we want to get as much feedback as possible, especially from active music creators and producers. And so we have a type form that I think has a dual purpose. One, if you want to be added to the beta list for some of the stuff that we're building, we'd love to hear from you on that. And then we'll also be giving away a couple of the subscriptions to the current generation of Boomy to some of the people who write in as well. So we'll be dropping that in as a type form link, and you'll be hearing from our team if you fill out.
Amazing. Thanks, Alex. So this is a very exciting and topical panel, which will focus on best practices around using AI to assist with your music creation efforts. A quick introduction for myself. So my name's Alex Brees. I'm the CEO and founder of Unheard. At Unheard, we're a music tech company that allows artists to run data-led marketing campaigns to reach their most valuable fans across all of the marketing verticals that are interesting for you as an artist. Our mission is to give every artist a fair chance of success. And that's what we've been working on for the last couple of years. We've got 85,000 artists from around the world using the product, and we're just really getting started. So it's a really exciting time for us. And I'm absolutely thrilled to have another Alex, probably one of the best names in the game, the co-founder and CEO of Boomy, an AI-powered music creation tool and distribution platform with over 1 million creators who make, share, and monetize their tracks. So that puts our 80,000 kind of right down there, and actually not that impressive.
It's actually two. Sorry to cut you off. It's actually two at this point. Yeah.
Love that. And Alex, you're not just a founder.
Sorry, not trying to say. I think it's great that you have a lot of users.
Thank you so much. And you're not just the founder and CEO, but a musician, serial music entrepreneur. You previously founded AudioKite Research, and you've worked with a number of music and media brands in consulting and advisory capacities, including Shady Records, Goliath Artists, Verify Media, and many more. So, Alex, thank you so much for joining us. Could we just dive into your background a little bit? And could I ask, what was it that led you on this journey to creating Boomy?
Yeah, sure. And thanks so much for that nice introduction. Maybe just to quickly follow up on those things. Yeah, I started as a musician. I was that guy with a violin and a case out in New York, hoping somebody would drop in a couple of dollars. Somehow made my way to the music tech side of things, created an A&R research company called AudioKite, where we basically did the equivalent of political polling, but for songs, and built that product out. Very honestly, kind of similar to Unheard, right? It was very much an artist marketing company, artist services company. Musicians could basically just find out, what their best song was, settle arguments, things like that. And we sold that business in 2016. But as we were, growing it out, and we had this huge data set, I got to meet, and this is like 10 years ago at this point. I got to meet what I would call the first wave of maybe, AI music researchers, a couple of startups in that space who wanted to use our product to basically market test or see the difference, right, between, what they were calling AI generative then and, all the data that we had on, let's call it non-AI music in the same studies. And so it was just very eye-opening to me at the time. As somebody who cared a lot about music and as somebody who was interested in the technology, it just seemed very obvious that even 10 years ago, that this was going to become a really big thing, that the technology would improve. It would probably improve, rapidly, rather than linearly. And at a certain point, what it would do is bring the barriers to creating music down, which was really I think the trajectory that music creation was on anyway, right?
Mm.
We were living through this era of digital audio workstations and plugins and things that just made your job as a producer, job as a musician so much easier. And it was just obvious that this was going to be, this was going to be a huge thing. And so a few years ago, got together with my co-founder Matthew Matthew Santorelli has a huge amount of experience, more on the industry side of this stuff. And we founded Boomy to really kind of democratize or spread out the capacity for, let's call it even non-musicians or non-musical people to be able to participate in the music economy, which of course is growing, very rapidly. And that, I think, was the origins of why we created Boomy. And obviously the last, year and all the AI hype and all the craziness has set us on a pretty fascinating trajectory at this point.
Amazing. And I think there are certainly parallels, like you said, between your previous business and this business, with our business at hurd, because one of our missions is to democratize access to, powerful marketing tools in the same way that you're democratizing access to powerful creator tools. Would you say that, and how would you, go about describing a typical use case of Boomy? Like, how are people using Boomy at the moment?
Yeah, it's really fascinating to watch, especially over the years and over the, now 2 million users. I would say I would kind of put it into two different buckets depending on experience level, right? Because we sort of oriented the product towards, first time music creators, people who don't know what a digital audio workstation is necessarily. Maybe they don't have a great sense of like what they don't have maybe an innate sense or skill level to be able to create and express music on their own or express themselves musically on their own. But they can get started with our tools. They can use very simple mechanisms to start from a, almost completed work, add their humanity to it, create really interesting stuff. And I would say in the, let's call it non-musician or first-time musician category, we see a lot of silly stuff. We see a lot of people having fun. Gamers were kind of an early adopter base. They'd like make fun of each other. We see a lot of parents and kids, actually. We see a lot of just the types of people who, again, are looking for not a music creation experience where they're going into maybe like a hugely emotional, journey in a studio and all the things that I think your audience is probably used to. And, look, the first thing you want to do when you create a song is share it with the people who you love. And so we've enabled a distribution platform built into Boomy where, you can go from never having created a song in your life to having something submitted to streaming services in, under an hour. And that was a pretty big innovation that I think we put forward and moved the market towards. And so that would be the first bucket, right? I think it's casual, everyday. A friend sent me a song the other day. She made about her dog on Boomy, and it's fun, right? But I think increasingly over the years, we've seen this adoption from this other category, right? Which is professionals, which is some of the best producers in the world, great artists, and they're using Boomy in multiple different ways. I mean, some of them will use it as a basically just a creative augmentation tool, or we've heard, break writer's block. That's something we hear a lot. People will kind of go on and maybe start a song, on Boomy, take it off the platform, create something with it, and then redistribute it. There's just a lot of really interesting experimentation going on with people in your audience, right? People who are musicians and know what they're doing. And I think that's the category where we really zeroed in to what you could call a label business in every meaningful way. There's some really amazing artists we pulled out of that. I'll give a shout out to Kathira, who has participated in these UN events and has combined a lot of what she's done musically on her own, I guess, with some of the stuff that Boomy is doing, and that's just one of many examples of an A&R capacity that we've started to build out. Where if you look at all these people expressing themselves with music in all these different ways, there's a lot of gems in there. There's a lot of really cool stuff. And so last year we announced a partnership with Warner ADA to elevate some of those artists and sort of say, hey, like, this is a really cool song. This is really good. Let's put some weight behind it. Let's put marketing dollars behind it. Let's see what we can do with it. And I think tools like Unheard are super valuable as we just evaluate how to take some of the great stuff that our people are making and push it for them. So in some ways, Boomy is also a place to be heard and be discovered and be taken seriously by our our community and our A&R team.
Amazing. And I love so much that you said there. And I've got a couple of questions. I just wanted to double click on a couple of things. The first is,
sure.
You said about whether a song is good or not, and then you might pass it to ADA or help amplify that track. How do you determine whether it's good? Is that the metrics for the track are starting to increase, or is it more of a subjective view on the quality of the music?
So we all get into a smoky bar and we sit in the back and we like look at it and we really kind of feel it and think about it. It's honestly, it's very human driven. We put ears on every release that goes out, right? Wow. We review everything. And for DSP standards for one, but also for hey, like, this person has a really interesting voice, this person has a really interesting story. We also get a lot of inbound from some of these artists who want to do interesting and novel and crazy stuff. We have one of our favorite artists, Paperboy Prince out of New York, wanted to do a 500 song album with their community. So brought in all these different voices from the community, created songs on Boomy very quickly. It was a fun time trying to explain why we were shipping out a 500 song album to the DSPs, but we figured it out. And that's another example of what are creative projects that this level of creation can enable that are totally new. I don't know how long it would take a normal creation process to do a 500 song community album. But that's just another example of something that we found through like an inbound request, right? So I would say it's a combination of listening through stuff. Obviously, metrics influence it as well, but it's not something necessarily where we just want to sit back and see what's taking off. We think of ourselves as being like the earliest possible place that you could find greatness, because a lot of the time, most of our users, this is the first time they're creating music. They don't always know how good they are. And so, having an A&R team that can bring some of that experience has been really, really interesting. And definitely, I don't think there's any other self-styled AI music companies who are investing that heavily into artist development.
Yeah, I totally agree. And one thing you said there would be interesting, right? If I'm an artist and I'm sat at home and I'm not using any AI tools to support my creation, and you just told me that one artist created a 500 track album, I'm going to be thinking,
sure,
that's diluting my pie. That's diluting my potential revenue. And it's also, how do I get to that level? How do you deal with those sorts of questions? Because I'm sure artists come to you and they say, that's not fair that they can create a 500 track album. And like, how can I start to do that?
Yeah, look, I think it gets to this question of what is it that you as an artist, right, are going to bring to the table? What is your unique voice? How do you stand out? Why do you matter against the backdrop of, forget about AI for a second, just musicians in general? And I think that's a hard question that everybody has to answer individually, that has become harder over time as that barrier has gone down, right?
Yes.
I started my career as a violin player, right? And I also play guitar and a lot of other instruments, but to me, guitar is feels like cheating, right? Guitar feels unfair. It's like you can be in tune the whole time as you're playing it. You don't have to study this thing from the age of 4 in order to squeak out a decent sound. So I think you can draw lines really anywhere you want. And if you take a step back, if you took all AI out of the equation, the natural progression of music creation has been a lowering bar, really since people started making music with computers in general. And additionally, what AI means and what that word means even, right, which we could do a whole separate hour on, has changed significantly over the years, right? So the way I look at it from most musicians is that I actually don't hear I'm happy to have those debates, and I have, but we don't hear that as much from the musician side of things, right? I think most artists and most producers are like, how can I use this stuff?
Yeah,
How can I use it without getting in trouble, right? From a
yeah,
copyright perspective for some of the systems. And can X, Y, or Z feature exist? Can these solutions exist? I mean, for musicians, it's almost like being mad that there's this new instrument that's come out, right? So that's how I think about it. But I don't want to hand wave, the concerns either about the
yeah,
fact that there will probably be billions of musicians and people expressing themselves musically in the future. And what that means is that you have to focus on greatness. There's already a huge amount of competition before people could create with AI. There will be even more competition for those listener ears. And it's why, product, not to plug too hard, but why products like Unheard, I think, are so important, to be able to kind of get yourself heard, get yourself out of the, sea of noise, so to speak, because there's nothing anybody's going to do that's going to slow that down.
yeah. I think you're right, and I think artists understand the practical uses of AI now. It's more and more in kind of national press, and people are getting more comfortable talking about AI and adopting AI. And I think artists that are, truly creative. I was on a panel at South by Southwest with an amazing artist, and he uses AI every single day. Whether
Yeah,
it's Chat GPT to create his press releases, whether it's a tool like Boomy to help him optimize his music. So artists who get it are using it and adopting it. And I think an artist can lean into it as much or as little as they want to. It's up to them. You're not forcing it down someone's
absolutely.
throat. Pick it up if you want to. Don't if you don't want to. And you talked about some edge cases, I think, in terms of some unusual use cases of people using Boomy, like the 500 track album. I think you said your friend was using their dog or something to create some noises. Have you got anything that's been really interesting alongside those two examples that you think that was crazy?
I mean, it's honestly happened so frequently. I would just point people to our homepage. And I would point people to some of the playlists that we have on Spotify. There's some really really good stuff. I shouldn't say surprisingly good stuff. There is some really good stuff in there, right? And look, not every single user who comes to Boomy is going to create a chart topper. But when I think about what success looks like, for that person, if you can take somebody who has always wanted to create music, right, and has never even tried, or has opened this up and it's too hard, there's just too much. I'm very lucky that I went to a public school that had a music program in it. I had a musical family that was supporting me. I mean, most people don't have the support structure to be able to explore this stuff. And when you go through that playlist on our homepage, and if you go through that playlist on Spotify and listen to those songs, I would say probably offhand, maybe 50-60% of them, this is like the main way that these people are creating their art. And so, I don't want to like highlight any or prefer any one, artist over another. We try to stay diplomatic there, but I would point you to that because we're constantly listening to stuff. We're constantly posting up there. And those songs are really, really cool and really, really good.
I love that. And you talked about success there for an artist on Boomy, which I think is really interesting. And when we talk about success at Unheard, sure, we can talk about growth in your streaming and social media metrics. But actually what we try and talk about is return on investment for an artist using our product is time. We want to take
Right.
care of the marketing side so you can focus on what you're good at, which is creating great music. And it sounds actually like there's similarities again there in terms of what success means for an artist is it's time back to maybe focusing on other things that you want to do or creating even more music or even better music. Would you say that that's a fair assumption?
I think that all of the positives, negatives, questions around generative AI, right, as applied to music, have to do with time. We've reduced the time that it takes to go from an idea to a song. I mean, that's fundamentally what generative AI is doing. We're reducing the time that it takes to go from thinking about participating in the music market to actually being able to participate. We've reduced the time it takes to go from if you think about it in a traditional context, a label concept, a whole bunch of, songs and work and all that stuff, into something where I could try multiple different personas, multiple different types of music. Maybe I want to be a rapper, but I don't want my main act to be a rapper, I can go on a Boomy, I can try that, I can throw that out there, and see what the market response is, very, very quickly. So yeah, I think a lot of this tracks back to time, efficiency, and that doesn't necessarily mean uncreative, because that's where I think the criticism comes from. It's like, well, if it's so fast or if it's so simple, some of the, again, we're going to drop a type form in. We're working on some really cool stuff, and I was in a session where we were testing some of these models earlier this week, and a producer we're working with commented, was playing back, some of the outputs of this new model, and was just, their mind was being blown, because they're like, do you have any idea how, he's like, this is perfect, right? This particular stem, this particular thing. It's like, I'm going to use this. I'm going to put this in a beat. Do you have any idea how long that would have taken me, right, to craft this? He's like, it would have taken me days, and I would have gotten to something like this, but now I can do it in seconds, right? I can do it in, and so I think you're going to see I think one way of thinking of it, which I would discourage, is, well, because all this time gets reduced, there's going to be all this new music, and it's it's going to be flooded, and it's going to be, impossible to stand out. I think the right way to think about it, and this isn't unique to music, is just as this massive productivity booster, in that, you can take any musician or any producer who's already prolific, you're going to 10x that output pretty quickly. That just means getting to better ideas and more success faster. The difference between digital marketing and putting up a sign on on your lawn. So that's how I think about it anyway.
I love that. And one thing that sprung to mind there is the volume of music that we will be exposed to in the future. Like you said, artists can now create a 500 track project in, a week or a couple of days, whereas before it had taken them a long, long time. How do you think, I'm really interested to hear your view on, how do you think the streaming platforms will deal with that sort of volume, and how then do you think that will impact consumers, I suppose?
Yeah, sure. I think it's only a net positive for both. I mean, is my view. YouTube and Spotify and these platforms, SoundCloud, they benefit when there's more interest, right? More people participating in the ecosystem, more people caring about music, which I think is a way overlooked aspect of one of the things that happens with this, right? I mean, think about it for a second. We hear and have heard for years, and not to get political, but about streaming payouts, about how the system works, how the pie is divided, all that stuff. And ultimately, I think what we're trying to do is figure out how to get people caring about music to the same degree that they care about games, to the same degree that they care about movies and TV and these other categories that, if you look at it, are far outpacing music consumption in general. And I think the best way to get somebody to care about music again is to have them see themselves on Spotify, right? See their own royalties come in. Start to say, hey, wait a minute, if I have a channel, if I have a TikTok channel, I could be using somebody else's music and they get paid, or I could be using the music that I'm creating and I could get paid for that. And so, I think one of the things we've done at Boomy really well is bring the barrier of entry, not just to creation, but also to participation, in a way that nobody, I think, ever really thought was possible, right? Before that. And I think the net benefit to the consumer is that you're going to see a blurred line. You're going to see a blurry line between a consumer who is primarily the audience for something, and a consumer who is also actively participating in that same market. Generative AI is just, again, going to bring that barrier down to zero across everything. And would you call your average TikToker, a consumer? They're making 10-second videos. They're posting, tons of videos every day. And so this traditional paradigm of having studio media or media organizations that are saying, here's the 5 artists you have to listen to, I think that will probably erode over time. And I think as it pertains to superstars, right, that doesn't get impacted at all. The biggest stories, of the last couple of weeks have all been about, in the midst of all of this AI sort of, chaos in the discussion, there's been, the biggest music stories are all about the superstars still. So I don't think that goes away at all. I think this becomes totally additive as more people see themselves as creators, more people care about music. It becomes a net benefit for everything. Not everybody sees it that way, but that's the view we've developed over the last few years.
I love that, and I think like you said, it's really encouraging consumers to be more immersed in music. Rather than just being a passive listener. Everyone has music going through them in some way, shape, or form, right? Everyone has kind of some sort of musical being within them, and I think, like you said, democratizing access to creation and allowing artists to create and put their music out into the world ultimately improves buy-in for consumption too. I totally get that. One of the challenges we see at Unheard sometimes is that around 20 to 30% of artists trying to promote their music objectively aren't ready to promote their music. Right? And that could be as simple as they've not got a Spotify bio, so therefore people can't really start to engage and understand their story. They've not mixed their track properly. It's not been mastered. They haven't got a high-res image or even an image on their Spotify profile. And, that then impacts consumption, because if I go and listen to a track which isn't mixed properly or mastered, it's not going to be a great experience for me. How do you think about kind of quality of output and I guess how that affects consumption?
Well, I actually think that's somewhere that we can actually bring the baseline up, right? If you're using some of these generative tools, there are infinite ways. If you don't know, I want to be careful with how I say this because I don't want to disparage it, right? Yeah. I think that over and over again throughout, especially recent music history, there's all kinds of stuff that's come out that is not at a huge, bedroom pop, right? What would have been a totally sacrilegious and insane idea 15, 20 years ago, right? The idea that somebody was going to get, on the Billboard charts from a song that they made in their bedroom with a digital audio workstation was not something that anybody can imagine at that time, right? Now it's become incredibly normal. I think that the production standards, so long as they reach a certain bar, so, if it doesn't hurt your ears, like when you're listening to it, I actually, this is just a personal view of mine, would say that I don't know that I would apply and maybe you have better data on this, right? But I would say that an artist should be an artist. And if they want to scream into a mic, as some of our users do, and, make something really crazy sounding or speed everything up to BPMs that make no sense and get really experimental, get really crazy, look, is that going to have a wide market appeal? No. Is that their honest, expression of their musicality? Then yes, and that's something that should be celebrated and supported. And I would say you never know what's going to catch. Last year, I feel like everybody overlooks this. You had, for the first time ever, an independent artist who had absolutely no label affiliations get to #1 on the Billboard charts. Like, that happened. And that's incredible, right? And I think what I would do is I would go back to some of the SoundCloud rappers that blew up with these really grainy, low quality, overly, saturated tracks that ended up getting billions and billions of streams. Look at, obviously the performance last year that went to #1, which was a guy and a guitar and a mic, and say, would those pass broad quality standards? Is that going to pass what a label would put out and put their stamp on? I think we're in this very interesting moment where, so long as you're connecting with an audience, so long as you're telling an honest story and you're representing yourself, I would encourage you to get crazy, because if for that 30% that might not be ready because they're not meeting some quality standards, I would bet there's another 30% that have perfectly produced music, right? Yeah. And I've seen this in some of the artist services work I've done in the past, but that's too similar, right? Or too generic, or too much like what somebody can get from some other artist that doesn't perform for nothing to do, right, with how they performed it. So I don't know if that's the message you want me sending, but my personal view is make as crazy music as you want, especially now. Probably what's going to get attention is the stuff that doesn't sound like everything else, right?
Yes.
So anyway, without bringing AI into it, I really think that artists just need to be honest to themselves. And if they, as long as it can pass, what I would say is the DSP standards, right?
Yeah.
Should be fair game, because you never know.
Yeah. It's such an interesting debate, because also, for us anyway, we don't want to get involved in the creative process at all. We don't want to touch that, because we believe artists should be artists. There are great tools out there like Boomy that will assist you in creating great music. And so, like you said, if we are feeding back that actually objectively your music isn't quite ready, we've got to be very careful with what we're talking about. So the digital health stuff is fine to talk about. You've not got a Spotify bio, that would improve your chances of,
Of course. Yeah.
But on the quality of the music, it's very, very sensitive. So we have done a lot of work on it, but there's still a lot of work to be done, without a doubt.
Sure. And on that stuff, have a bio, have a, get that's just good practice, right? That makes sense to me.
Exactly. And this is quite a broad question. I just wanted to kind of take a step back a little bit and just ask you, AI gets a hard rep in music sometimes, and that's fair.
Does it?
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, I think so. But what are the kind of most common misconceptions when it comes to music and AI? And I can start by talking from Unheard's perspective, and this is non-generative AI, but it's a great assistant. You can use AI to create a marketing plan or TikTok content ideas or your press release or your Spotify for Artists pitch. There's loads and loads of assistive uses when it comes to non-generative AI. But how about generative? And, let's talk about those misconceptions and squash them.
Yeah. And yeah, I would keep my scope just to generative AI, right? And what are, I think it's a great question, because there are many, many misconceptions, which, 1 minute rant here, likely come from definitions of AI that have been evolving in very odd ways. Like when people use the word AI, generally speaking, they mean automation. Like they'll use it as a shorthand for automation that is complicated to explain. Beyond that, it refers to a whole bunch of underlying technologies and concepts, for example, like machine learning itself, of which has no meaning as a term. That refers to a broad subject. So I think the AI nature of this stuff is not just the vagueness of the term, right, is where you should start if you want to be smart about this, right? So the first misconception I would say is just that AI is a thing. The AI, that's even a meaningful term. Whenever you hear AI right now, that has become sort of popularized and maybe somewhat bastardized, I think you have to first think, okay, what am I talking about here? What kind of AI am I talking about here? Are we talking about generative AI? Are we talking about AI as applied to health systems? Are we talking about ChatGPT? Are we talking about a GPT model versus a diffusion model versus whatever? I don't think it takes a huge amount of time to get a basic level of knowledge of this stuff. And beyond anything we're talking about here, the ways these technologies will transform society means that you should have a basic, we should be teaching people this stuff, right? So the first misconception is that there's some sort of all-consuming AI concept that is coming to destroy the world. We literally actually get emails from people who are very concerned that our AI is going to escape and destroy the world. That's actually a real thing that our customer service team has received, which sounds silly, right? But actually is quite profound if you think about it, because it means that your average person is not thinking through what is the difference between an AI system that creates music or helps people create music and an AI system that's going to go be in a weapon or be in a a health context, etc. So to stop that rant and to go maybe another misconception about generative AI music, right? I think the most important misconception, which is not just a misconception that people have and complain about on Twitter, but actually is impacting policy, I think, in a very negative way, is this idea that it's not a human, right? That there's some sort of AI that's become sentient, and the thing that this AI likes to do independently is sit around and make songs, and with zero human involvement whatsoever, and whoever or whatever this AI is going to eat into the humans in some way, right? I think that the where that comes from again is from that overly broad definition of AI. In reality, there is a human being behind every single quote unquote AI song that's ever been made. All 20 million songs that has a heartbeat behind it from one of these people. And I think when people talk about their fear of AI, they're not actually afraid of AI. They're afraid of the people who are using it. They're afraid of competition. They're afraid of new entrants, a lot of the stuff. And I think it's easier for us to put a negative slant on an amorphous sort of concept of AI than it is to say, like, I don't want people participating in the music market because there's less room for me. That's like an ugly thought. And it's easier to say, oh, no, it's AI. That's a really bad thing. But that leads, again, to bad policy. What is an AI generated song? Like, what does that mean? Is Brian Eno an AI generated? Is that AI music? I mean, it would fit if it's the Copyright Office's definition for sure. In the most recent one, you're seeing the U.S. Copyright Office, challenge some pretty seriously held ideas about the level of human authorship, right, necessary for copyright. And that's been an ongoing conversation that we've been having for several years. What is the line? How much of a human influence do you need in order for it to go from this sort of very hard to define concept of an AI generated song to a people or just a song, right? And so many times in these conversations that I get into, it's like, well, what about all this AI generated music? And I'm like, show me one. I don't know what that means. There are people who are coming up with ideas, who are coming up with lyrics, who are coming up with different creative concepts, who are using tools like Boomy, which is fundamentally an editing tool. I mean, you can get a starting point, but for example, we like will not commercialize songs that if you just press a couple buttons and have submitted it. We have a generic policy that says, no, you got to like do something. It has to be a human created work in order for us to consider that to be something that is commercialized. And so we've had to answer this question internally, right? How much human influence do we think is necessary? But I think that bar should be pretty low. You now have artists. I've seen discussion about this. You now have artists who are creating not with AI, which whatever, great. Whose songs are being rejected from certain distributors because they think they're AI, right? Or because they're too generic, or they don't have, and that's bad. That just sits wrong with me, because I think as long as a person is creating a song, that song should have the same level of seriousness in the market, no matter how it gets created. And as more and more artists are incorporating AI into their workflows, I think this concept of an AI generated song versus a people created song is a misconception that we're probably losing the battle on. That most people are just jumping to this idea that there is an AI and that this has no human involvement. But I think the humans behind those songs, and being one of them, that's just sort of wrong. It's just not true. There's a heartbeat behind every song out there, whether somebody created it with AI or not. And I think hopefully over time, that will be more clear in the market. I think the worst case scenario is that you have this other category where it's like, well, here's the real songs and here's the not real songs. That's without historical precedent, I guess, at the very least. Nobody ever said that auto-tune songs, right? Oh, well, they use auto-tune in their song, they should be paid less, or they should be categorized this other way, or they shouldn't, And so I think that's a creative classism that's starting to emerge that I would really have, especially artists, think deeply about. Like, what does that mean? And what does it mean when we can say the way you created your music changes the way it's marketed, changes the way it's paid? Music is music. People are just making music. I don't think anything is particularly special about AI other than the time that we were talking about earlier.
Fascinating answer. So much I'd love to dive into there, and I think we could talk about that for hours, like you said before. But I'm just going to pause and ask participants if they've got any questions. I've got one more question that I wanted to ask Alex, but if you've got any questions that you want to ask, we are doing the Q&A towards the end. Please stick them into the chat and I will come to those questions after I've just wrapped things up. One of the last questions I wanted to ask you, Alex, is, we've talked about what potentially the future of the music industry looks like, in the sense that we've democratized access to music production. There are hundreds of millions of there are hundreds of millions of tracks now, but hundreds of millions of more tracks available to listen to. There's a merger between being a creator of music and also then a consumer, and perhaps that increases your appetite to want to listen to music. For me, if I sat in an artist chair hearing that, I would think, amazing, I can create more music, but scary that I'm going to have more competition and perhaps then I get a smaller share of the pie, potentially. What's your view on where the music industry is headed? And in particular, I guess, from an artist perspective.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, I mean, as it pertains to generative AI music, I think it's just going to become very normal. I think that we've seen this movie before, like probably 30 times, where a new technology comes out of music, right? And there's a backlash, or there's a, I guess whatever incumbent industry or incumbent norms, sees that technological innovation, tries to suppress it, and then it becomes completely normalized, right? That cycle goes all the way back to the turn of the century, when there was a pushback on the concept of recorded music from the I wish I brought the image. It's one of my favorite images. There's this great political cartoon from, I want to say, like the 1910s, where it's this robot that's coming to like eat music, and you look at this political cartoon and it's like, you think it's talking about AI. It's actually talking about this concept, or just Google it, canned music in theaters. It's talking about this concept of canned music, right? Because at the advent of recorded music, one of the first applications was being able to be in more theaters and not have to hire a pianist to sit there and play towards the silent film. They can now have this canister that they could play. And the musicians union at the time, I think in a fairly pushed back on that and said, who would ever want to listen to a recording of music, right? And that was probably the popular view at the time. I think if you fast forward, there's other historical examples. There's the advent of synthesizers, right? Similar thing. Queen used to put no synths on the back of their albums, and then a few years later, they're using synths. Like there was, I think more recently, auto-tune is a great example of something where it came out, it was seen as being unfair, or I think a lot of the things people say about AI now were being said about auto-tune then. People boycotted, these songs. They said they shouldn't have Grammy consideration, right? So all of these historic, and now, find me a song on the Billboard Top 100 that didn't use autotune, right?
Yes.
And I like the example of autotune because the other thing autotune did is it literally gave a voice to people who couldn't sing, right?
Yes.
If you think about the proliferation of genres where autotune is such an important piece of it, it's because a lot of these people couldn't sing, or couldn't sing in tune. Autotune became a creative tool. Autotune became the standard, and so now there are whole artist careers that were built on that sound and only on that sound. And so I think the only thing that's different with AI and generative AI music is that it takes that same concept of, well, I can't sing and now I can, to everything, to the entire song. And that's what's really exciting, and that's what's also pretty scary. But people ask me all the time, aren't you afraid? Aren't artists afraid of being replaced, right? And my answer is, at least for how long I've been paying attention to it, I mean, I would say AI generative music probably started in this cycle in 2012, right? Let's give Juke the credit. So you've had AI music products in, dozens of them in various forms for 10 to 12 years now. If you can find me an artist who was replaced with AI, maybe I would change my view, but I never met a musician who said, well, now that AI exists, like I can't exist, like I'm going to stop. So this replacement idea, or this, again, AI isn't replacing anything.
Yeah.
People are becoming more efficient. People are going to express themselves with music with less time, as you pointed out. And that's where, and the industry and the platforms and the remuneration have to adjust, and they are adjusting in real time. As it pertains to the streaming services, we've gotten questions before about, well, hey, like there's so much music, how do people sort through it? I don't think anybody's having a hard time finding songs through search functions. I don't think anybody's having, I don't think more people participating is a bad thing. And ultimately, we, like any label, are going to participate in these outlets according to the rules that they set out. And so if they're going to change the way they, they structure payments, then we'll adjust to that.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. That's a very, very detailed answer. We've got one question here, which I thought was quite an interesting one, which talked about, are there any big kind of no-nos or tools or watch out areas that we should be aware of as artists when it comes to AI? What should we avoid, I suppose, and what are the warning signs for that?
So I think this is the only conversation I've had all year that didn't include the word a discussion of training data and copyrighted training data, right? That is probably something I would be very cognizant of. And, I don't know that I do think that there are different types of AI products out there, right? And something really important that I probably should have clarified earlier about Boomy is that Boomy's models were not created using, copyrighted data or copyrighted training data, right? There's a big debate going on about training data. The law is very unclear, and there are, products out there that are disclosing, how they train their models, and there are products that are not. And I think if you're using a product where there's unclear origins, right, of those models, I will say I have heard that there are labels that, that if that label, right, believes their content was misappropriated by that model, they would be hesitant to, utilize or release, songs that utilize some of those. So I would say that looking out for gotchas, I would just say that as you use these AI products, see if their training data has been, disclosed. And if it has not, then, or if there's a question around it, then, maybe just tread lightly there. The other thing I would say is that there's been a trend, just talked to New York Times about this, of people taking artist voices and, creating tributes or creating like interesting stuff, which I think is actually fine as a practice. I think if you want to, for your own enjoyment, create some song, if you want to hear, SpongeBob sing Sinatra, like that's a new capability that exists in the world, and I think could be privately enjoyed. But obviously, releasing music or trying to commercialize other people's voices is like should go without saying is a no-no. But obviously we've seen a lot of that. It's not something that we do. We're not a voice company, and it's not something that we release or allow on Boomy. But it's definitely something to be aware of. That, for example, I heard a story about a producer who was submitting tracks for consideration and kind of used the voice of the musician they were submitting to be like, look, here's how it's going to sound, and that musician got pretty mad. So if you're pitching songs, I would just and other artists are cool with it. Obviously, Grimes, like there's some who think it's really fun. So I would watch out for that too, right? I would just say name and likeness rights and the usage of somebody else's voice. If you're going to do that, and if you're going to do it in any kind of commercial context, like definitely seek direct permission from that individual, because there's just a lot of problems with that. And it's become illegal now too, more explicitly, right? But there's new law in Tennessee. I think there's going to be national law about that. So I would just not wade into that territory. Instead, I would try to figure out how to create a great voice of your own, even if it's a generative voice.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alex. And I've got a couple more questions that have just been asked. So Paul Smith, thanks for the question, Paul. He said, having never worked with AI in music, only ChatGPT, how does it actually work? Do you have to add in your preferences on instruments, BPM, style, key chords, or is it another UX? I wonder if you can keep this as short as possible, but I know it could be a long answer.
Sorry, yeah. I'll try to give short answers. It depends on the AI product for sure. And I think the different interfaces, and my advice overall would be to try them all. Go to Boomy, try it out. Go to, I would probably recommend Stable Audio for text prompting. They've done, again, they disclose their training data. You know where it's coming from. Not going to get in trouble with that. And, for example, on Boomy, our interface is, yes, it's that. It's go in, set a BPM, set different sliders, go to the custom mode, and it'll create something for you as a starting point. And if you don't like it, throw it out, reject it. If you do like it, save it, manipulate it, save different versions from there. It's a lot of fun. And then I would encourage you to sign up for the Typeform we're going to drop in if we didn't already, and check out some of our next generation models, which are more about text prompting, more about describing what you want in natural language, and then getting back a piece of audio, right, that you can use in your creative process to create with using a different interface. That was still kind of a long answer.
No, that was perfect.
I feel like I've kept it under a minute.
No, that was great. So that's Boomy or Stable Audio as like first point of places where you could go.
Those are the two I would recommend as being good examples of like different takes on the interface.
Yeah, amazing. And the next question from Chuck Peters is there an AI tool someone can use for mixing and mastering? I do know a few.
Yeah, I mean, you might know better than I do. I've definitely used some of the Isoto products have AI systems in them, and they tend to be very good. Ozone, even 10 years ago, Ozone was pretty good, but they've added a lot of really interesting AI in there. I think that I think it depends on what you want to do. I feel like there's new mixing stuff that's come out. On Boomy, we actually have an integration with Dolby mastering. So you can actually master, relatively professionally, the songs you create on there. So that's, one example of a mastering tool. And I'm sure you can probably get that outside of Boomy in some way, somewhere. Not exactly sure where. But Alex, you might know some of these tools as well.
Yeah, I think that's like the Dolby mastering tool is a great example. Master Channel is another one. They're doing really well at the moment. They have a nice tool. ROX is another one. And there are lots of kind of interesting free tools out there as well. So yeah, ROX, Master Channel, and obviously it sounds like you guys have got your own with Dolby, which is awesome. The next question I have from Joseph Craven is, would there ever be a case of songs sounding the same, i.e. the AI suggesting the same data to two people?
We not really, or not in the way that you think. It depends on, again, it kind of depends on which type of AI system we're talking about, but most of them, and especially the way we tune Boomy, like we've tuned it to be way more creative than give you the same song that's going to sound the same every single time, right? That means sometimes it's going to be bad, or sometimes it's going to be weird. But that's why we give you the tools to kind of go in and shape it and change it however you want. And then I would say with our next generation models, the amount and degree to which they can respond differently to the same prompts, kind of keeping it within the same range, but it will create, I think the coolest thing personally from a production standpoint is that a lot of these next generation models can invent totally new sounds, right? And totally new instruments. So it's not only that it'll sound different from one generation to the next, you may have a combination of like a guitar and a flute or whatever that you've asked it for. I think the coolest thing from a musical standpoint is that there's just this huge potential to synthesize new sounds in this totally new way. And if you're trying to, and if, again, it depends on the type of artist you are. If you're an artist who is part of a tradition, right, if you're creating folk music, that's not going to be, hugely useful for you. If you are somebody who really wants to be on the bleeding edge and push, production techniques, and I think these tools are going to be critical because everybody else is using them. And so it's almost like an arms race to create interesting sounds. But there are potentials, right, with overfitting and without getting to the math and so the concepts around it, where certainly you could have AI systems produce somewhat similar things from generation to generation. But I think broadly speaking, that's just not useful. And most of this, most everything is going to be pretty different. And at least on Boomy, everything's going to be absolutely original.
Amazing. Okay, brilliant. And then the last question, or last couple of questions, this one's interesting. So how do you see the future of music copyright? At the moment, it seems to be a real mess to manage. Do you think that for composers of the future, there could be protections for works generated using AI tools?
I think those protections currently exist, have existed, should exist. This is something where if you want to be really bored, you can Google a talk we gave at the Copyright Office back in 2019. I think you should probably just be able to Google like Library of Congress Boomy, and it should show up. There again, to what I was saying before, there is this new idea, which is about a year old, that AI generated works or sort of wholly computer generated works don't enjoy the same copyright protections. I think that idea is being challenged. I think there's going to be some new guidance very soon this year. It's going to clarify really what that means. I think the thinking there came from the phone book, right? If I'm making a copy of a phone book, that is not copyrightable, and I think that makes sense. If I use a computer to copy the phone book, that's a computer generated work. I didn't do anything to it. If I take a phone book and I crumple it up and I position it interestingly and put it up at MoMA, there is human influence. That's an artwork that's meets the standard. I would say that the future of copyright, to the extent that there is going to be any new law about this stuff, will probably be clarifying usage. And whether or not the creation of some of these models constitutes various different types of violations of existing copyright law. I think we're going to see a lot of that play out this year, next year. But what I would say practically as a musician, if you are creating music with AI, without AI, you're going to be fine. Submit that to the Copyright Office, and it's a human created work. There is no fully AI generative, sentient, fully computer generated work, at least in my opinion. I think in the opinions of many who are behind these cases. So as this stuff kind of gets normalized and figured out, I think as a musician, all you really have to care about is that you're registering your copyrights properly, that you are creating music the way that you want to create it, and that you continue to be a human. If you're not a human, I can't help you with that.
I think that's a great way to wrap it all up, to be honest with you. I think thank you so much, Alex. I learned a lot there, and I hope everyone on the call did as well. One question was, are you at the Great Escape next week?
I have to be in Nashville next week for Music Biz, unfortunately. So gonna miss it. And you have to miss Music Biz to be at the Great Escape. But at least they'll have sufficient Alexes in both events. Exactly.
Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. Like I said, that was incredibly insightful and informative. And I think people who are here today and people who will catch the recording afterwards, I think will get a lot of value from this. So thank you so much, Alex. And just to mention as well, in the Q&A chat, you can now see the type form that the Boomy guys have shared, and you can see the discount for the Unheard product as well. Now, we will wrap all of this into an email and share it with people that are here and people that registered their interest. So you will be able to see a recording of this session and the type form and the discount code. So thank you so much, Alex. Thanks everyone for attending, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Alex.
Cheers, Alex. Take care.
Bye-bye. Fun.